than 6,000 sinkholes have torn open along the shores of the Dead Sea, and they are growing in number by about 400 a year. Some are 130 feet wide. Some open in minutes, with no warning, swallowing roads, date palms, and parking lots whole. The first ones showed up in the 1980s. There were about 1,000 a decade ago. Now the western coast looks like an earthquake zone that never stops shaking, and large stretches of it are simply closed to people. So why is the lowest place on the planet caving into its own shoreline, faster every year, with nobody able to stop it? Here is the detail that tells the real story. The holes are not the disaster, they are the sign. The most famous salt lake on Earth is disappearing, 1 meter of water every single year, and the ground is falling into the space the water used to fill. Go back to the late 1980s. The first holes near the Dead Sea were small, a few scattered dents in the dirt along the shrinking shore. Geologists noticed them. Almost nobody else did. By the 1990s, there were dozens. By 2003, there were enough that a man could fall into one and barely make it out alive. His name is Eli Raz, a geologist with the Dead Sea and Arava Research Center, and the person best known for studying this problem. That year, he was measuring a hole on the shore near Kibbutz Ein Gedi when the ground gave out beneath him. He dropped close to 30 feet, landed on a ledge of fallen earth, and could not climb back up. He had a camera, a flashlight, a pen, and a roll of toilet paper. He did not have water. So he took photos of the inside of the sinkhole, and then he started writing his will on the toilet paper, a goodbye note to his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. 14 hours later, a rescue team pulled him out, unhurt. The crew that found him was the same kibbutz rescue team he had built and trained himself. Raz has said on the record that the sinkholes are, in his words, the most remarkable evidence of the brutal interference of humans in the Dead Sea. He would know. He has been warning anyone who would listen for more than 30 years. By 2015, the count had passed 3,000, and the holes had stopped being a strange sight and become a danger to anything built near the water. That was the year the famous Ein Gedi public beach, once Israel's most famous beach on the Dead Sea, was closed for good. Mineral Beach, to the north, was left empty the same year. 5 years later, in 2020, the Ein Gedi spa was cleared out as the ground around it began to give. At least 4 people have fallen into sinkholes that opened under their feet, and a hiker who wandered past the warning signs was badly hurt. So far, every one of them has come back out alive. The people who study this say that is mostly luck. What comes next is the part that still does not make sense to the visitors who come to see it. Because the Dead Sea is not running dry the way a desert puddle runs dry. It is being drained on purpose from the top of the river system, and it has been for 60 years. Pull back from the shore. The Dead Sea has no way out. Water flows in from the Jordan River at the north, and the only way out is straight up, pulled into the air by the heat of one of the hottest, driest skies on Earth. For thousands of years, the math balanced. The river brought water in, the sun took it away, and the lake held steady at its level far below every other body of water on the planet. It is the lowest point on the surface of the Earth, more than 1,400 feet below sea level, a long crack in the ground where Israel, Jordan, and the West Bank all meet. Its water is around 10 times saltier than the ocean, salty enough that a person floats on the surface without trying. This is old ground, full of history. The caves at Qumran on the northwestern shore held the Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden for 2,000 years until they were found in the 1940s and 50s. The old fort of Masada looks down on the water from a cliff to the south. For as long as people have kept records, the sea sat about where the old maps said it should. Now the maps are wrong, and they get more wrong every year. The lake has already split in two. The deep northern part still holds open water. The shallow southern part dried out decades ago and only survives because the mineral companies pump water into it to keep their drying ponds full. Then, in 1964, Israel finished the national water carrier and began pulling the upper Jordan River away to farms and cities. Jordan and Syria tapped the same river system from their own sides. Before that, the Jordan carried well over 1 billion cubic meters of water a year, close to 450 billion gallons, down into the lake. Today, only about a fifth of that flow is left in the river, and in dry years, just a few percent of what it once carried ever reaches the Dead Sea at all. The result is a lake starving at the surface. In 1930, the Dead Sea sat at 390 meters below sea level. By 2021, it had dropped to 435 meters below sea level, and it keeps falling about 1 meter every single year. Its surface has shrunk by roughly a third since the 1960s. That is the engine. Everything else, the holes, the withered orchards, the closed beaches, the empty resorts, runs off that one fact. The first group of holes in the 80s was a warning. The governments that could have acted on it looked away, and the lake kept dropping. Here is how a falling lake turns solid ground into a minefield. For tens of thousands of years, the high Dead Sea pushed salt deep into the mud along its shore, leaving thick buried layers of rock salt anywhere from 50 to 200 feet down. As long as the salty lake water sat against that buried salt, it held. Salt water cannot soak up any more salt. But when the lake pulls back, fresh groundwater from the mountains to the west moves in behind it, filling the gap the salt water left, and fresh water eats away at salt fast. Picture a sugar cube held under a slow, steady drip. From the outside, it looks solid. Inside, the water is hollowing it out, carving out a space that grows wider and weaker by the day. The surface holds, right up until the moment it does not. Then the roof drops all at once, and a sinkhole opens, sometimes 100 feet across, sometimes in under a minute. That is what swallowed Eli Raz. That is what is growing by 400 a year. Think about that for a second. The holes are not opening at random. They are following the exact line where the salt water used to meet the land, and they march north along the shore as the sea keeps pulling back. The collapse happens in such a regular way that scientists at the Geological Survey of Israel have learned to hear it coming. By burying special tools in the ground, they have picked up tiny shakes, far too small for any person to feel, rising up from the salt as it dissolves years before the surface ever caves. In one study, the first sinkhole opened 2.5 years after the tools first caught the ground groaning underneath it. Today, satellites scan the western shore for dips in the ground no bigger than a few millimeters, so officials can close a road or a beach before it swallows someone whole. And the pace is still climbing. A decade ago, the shore was adding holes by the hundreds. Now the rate runs to about 400 new sinkholes a year, and every meter the lake drops uncovers a fresh band of salt for the groundwater to attack. The faster the sea falls, the faster the ground fails. The two are locked together, but the version you have heard, that the Dead Sea is simply baking dry under a hot sun, is not the full picture. The sun is not the villain here. The river is gone because people took it. Picture the shore today. A boat captain named Jake Ben Zakin runs tours on what water is left. He used to launch from Mineral Beach, until the sinkholes closed it in 2015 and forced him to move. Out on the lake, he points to a dark patch in the bright blue water, a place where the seabed itself has fallen into a sinkhole below the surface. The holes are not only on the land anymore, they are opening under the lake, in the one part of this place people still come to see. The damage spreads outward from the waterline. First, the shore itself. At Kibbutz Ein Gedi, the date orchards along the old waterfront have withered, the palm trees bent over like sagging rag dolls where the ground gave out beneath their roots. The beach that once drew tourists from around the world is now a no-go zone of crumbling changing rooms, a rusted pier, and broken concrete steps that lead down toward a shoreline so far away you can no longer see the water from the top. Yariv Kita, the business director of Kibbutz Ein Gedi, put it plainly. He said the sinkholes are a threat to the kibbutz's very survival. Second, the resorts. Mineral Beach, famous for its warm mud pools, was left empty after a sinkhole swallowed its parking lot, its treatment rooms, and a row of palm trees. The Ein Gedi Spa, just down the coast, was cleared out as the ground around it began to fail. Together, those closures wiped out close to 40 jobs in a corner of the country that did not have many to spare. The only gas station for more than 60 kilometers sits fenced off and empty, the ground around it broken up by holes. Third, the highway. Route 90 is the longest road in Israel, the eastern spine that runs the length of the country from the far north all the way down to Eilat on the Red Sea. The stretch that runs along the western Dead Sea has been carved up by sinkholes. Engineers have closed sections, sent traffic onto patched side roads, and built a bridge over the Arugot stream that cost about $60 million, partly to keep the road ahead of the failing ground. There is a real reason those satellites watch the shoreline for those tiny dips. The other choice is a hole opening under a car at highway speed. And that was only round one. Fourth, the tourism money. The Dead Sea is one of the most visited natural spots in the Middle East, drawing people for its mineral mud and its water so thick that swimmers float without effort. Plans to build thousands of new hotel rooms on the Israeli side were dropped because there was no longer safe, solid ground to put them on. The Israeli tourism trade has pulled back almost entirely to the southern part, near the hotels at Ein Bokek, where the water is kept in place on purpose by industry, rather than fed by the dying river. Fifth, the whole region and the three peoples who share it. The Dead Sea sits at the meeting point of Israel, Jordan, and the West Bank. The western Israeli shore has the worst of the holes, a strip more than 60 miles long, dotted with them from Gedi in the north down toward Neve Zohar in the south. The Jordanian side has its own groups of holes, packed near the Lisan Peninsula. The collapse does not stop at a border, and neither does the cause. If you are finding this useful, subscribe. We cover water crises, disappearing lakes, and earth science events like this every week with the full picture you need to actually follow what is going on. While the holes get the headlines, the fight that really decides the Dead Sea's future is being held far from the shore, in government offices in 3 different capitals, over who controls the water and who pays to bring it back. And so far, that fight has produced almost nothing. For decades, the headline answer was a single huge project. Pump seawater uphill from the Red Sea at the port of Aqaba, run it north through Jordan, take the salt out of part of it for drinking water along the way, and send the leftover salty water into the Dead Sea to stop the level from falling. It was called the Red Sea to Dead Sea Conveyance. 3 governments signed a deal on it in 2013, backed by the World Bank, with a price tag around $10 billion. Engineers studied it for years and called it workable. Up to that point, the project was moving forward. Then it got stuck, year after year, on money, on politics, and on a lack of trust between the sides at the table. In 2021, Jordan officially pulled the plug, saying there was no real partner on the other side. The single biggest plan to save the Dead Sea was finished. You would think a lake disappearing at a meter a year, taking roads and resorts and jobs down with it, would force the governments around it to agree on something. Nobody did. Each country has since turned inward. Jordan is building its own line to take the salt out of seawater and carry it from Aqaba on the Red Sea up to its capital, Amman, a project meant to fight a national water shortage, aimed at its own taps and not at the lake. Israel has floated a different idea, sending water from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea instead. But officials say that one would not be moving water until somewhere around 2045, if it ever gets built at all. Meanwhile, at the southern end of the lake, the mining companies keep pulling Dead Sea water into vast, shallow ponds to collect potash, bromine, and magnesium, speeding up the loss from below even as the river runs dry from above. The Dead Sea Works has held those mining rights since 1961. They expire in 2030, and for the first time, the draft of the new deal includes fees for the water the industry uses. Abdelrahman Tamimi, the general director of the Palestinian Hydrology Group, has argued that the companies pumping the lake for minerals should simply stop. Others say the real fix is cutting how much water that industry is allowed to take, not ending it, because it also feeds jobs and tax money on every side of the border. On the ground, the people who live there are mostly left to cope. Israel has set aside more than $100 million to help Dead Sea communities deal with the sinkholes and the lost tourism, but money does not refill a lake. By 2025, reporters walking the old Gedi resort described it as looking like the end of the world, an abandoned lifeguard tower and a rusty pier standing over ground too broken to cross. The closures that were called temporary back in 2015 are now described, officially, as permanent. And while the governments argue, the holes keep coming. Eli Raz, the geologist who once wrote his will at the bottom of one, now says there are around 7,000 sinkholes across the region, and he expects that number to double to 14,000 in the next few years. Gidon Bromberg, the Israeli director of the group EcoPeace Middle East, which works across all 3 countries, summed up the whole collapse in a few words. He has called it nature's revenge for the way people have handled the region's water. There's one more layer to this story, and it is very old. The valley the Dead Sea sits in has a long history of swallowing people. The book of Genesis describes the valley around Sodom and Gomorrah as full of tar pits and tells of fleeing kings falling into them as they ran. Raz himself has studied that text and argued that those old pits may have been collapse holes in the same shaky ground, in the same valley, thousands of years ago. If he is right, the Dead Sea has been opening up beneath people since the oldest stories we have. The difference now is the speed. What once took ages is happening inside one person's lifetime. And a man who fell into one of these holes and lived has spent the rest of his career drawing maps of where the next ones will open. So the questions stack up over the shoreline tonight. Is the real number 6,000 or 7,000 or 14,000? And how would anyone keep count when the holes form faster than they can be mapped? Why did the collapse wait until the 1980s to begin? 2 full decades after the river was first pulled away? And how do you keep steady a sea that 3 governments cannot agree to share, fed by a river those same governments long ago drained for themselves? For now, nothing up the river has changed. The Jordan River still runs low, the lake still drops about 1 meter a year, the satellites still watch the western shore for the next dip in the ground. At the entrance to Gedi, a yellow sign reads "No entry for pedestrians," and behind it, a set of broken concrete steps leads down toward water that is no longer there. The mud pools sit dry. The gas station stays fenced. And somewhere along that 60-mile strip tonight, in the dark, with no one watching and no sound at all, the ground is opening again.